What is up? Welcome to another edition of At a Glance, a series in which I give you an appetizer, sample, or glimpse into a particular faction in 40k, and that's to help you decide if you want to look into them further and potentially collect them. So up on the chopping block, this time is another Tyranid force, Hive Fleet Kraken of the Second Tyrannic War. That was the Hive Fleet of that war. And because Tyranids don't have the same type of personality stuff you can talk about in terms of other forces, because they're ultimately a hive mind, and that takes away a lot of certain personality traits and things that you could talk about in regards of the force, because it's all one singular bent will. I like to talk about Tyranids like I do with Behemoth, about what they fought against, kind of the situation of that Hive Fleet's existence, and their foes. So Hive Fleet Kraken is the second major Tyranid Hive Fleet encountered, and it came some 250 years after Hive Fleet Behemoth. Now, the thing that makes Kraken interesting is that it demonstrates the Tyranids' hive mind learning and adapting. And as we know, with the fluff of Leviathan, Behemoth and Kraken were just really scout in force type of Hive Fleets. Now, where Hive Fleet Behemoth picked a lane of space and just railroaded through it like a sledgehammer until it was stopped, Kraken broke its fleet up into a series of independent smaller Hive Fleets and attacked multiple worlds simultaneously and effectively locked a whole sector away from the Imperium overnight through the shadows and the warp and everything, overwhelming defenses and all that. And this made it very hard to defend against, because it's overwhelming multiple planets at the same time, wearing you thin, essentially. And it also is hard to warn against because of the whole shadow and the warp covering a vast area. So this was another strategy employed by the hive mind. And in doing this, it did cut a lot of planets off, it did destroy a lot of planets, and the hive mind ultimately learned more with Kraken on top of what it learned with Behemoth. So part of that is because not only did it deal with the Imperium, there were some Tau forces it encountered, I'm guessing potentially for the first time, and it encountered some Eldar, again potentially for the first time. So it got a taste for other snacks, you could say, and it learned a bit about them. So basically, Hive Fleet Kraken was, you could say, a fleet of splinter fleets in a way, in the way it set itself up. And with that, the hive mind was able to hit a wider area of space, not just a single lane of space. Now, what Hive Fleet Kraken encountered was Tau, like I said, the craft world Eandon, Eldar, as it tried to engulf and destroy that craft world and ultimately failed, and then encountered, of course, a bunch of Imperium. Forge world stuff, so you have Skitarii, Knights, and Titans in there. You have Inquisition stuff, so Inquisitors, Deathwatch kill teams. Due to the wide scope of its attacking, potentially, and I do think either this one or another fleet, but you could also say this fleet dealt with some Sisters of Battle. And of course you have your planetary defense forces and your Imperial Guard, the Imperial Navy, and Space Marine forces. The Knights of Eternity is one such chapter, and it was obliterated, or at least it's thought that it was nearly destroyed, if not fully destroyed, by the Hive Fleet Kraken. We don't know anything about them, we don't know the color scheme or the symbol, but it's something if you want to toy with a different looking Space Marine chapter color pattern for your bases for Hive Fleet Kraken. That's an example of one that you have ultimate reign in creative license for. And we also have the Lamenters Space Marine chapter involved, the Sights of the Emperor Space Marine chapter involved, and those two chapters really got depleted pretty severely in the fighting. The Ultramarines chapter also showed up and fought, which makes sense considering that they have that experience from the First Tyrannic War, and it's through them, Rheneas Calgar, and the rest of the Imperial forces that victory is assured, essentially for the Imperium. Craftworld Eandon fulfills victory on its own, essentially. So those are the forces at play that are named. Of course, if you have a buddy who, let's say, plays Space Marines or Sisters of Battle or something, you could potentially trade some bits or do whatever to decorate your base in your buddy's forces to kind of build a narrative if you play against them a bunch or whatever it is. There is a lot of basing opportunity here because, again, we have a case where we're looking at a wide variety of planets attacked: Forge worlds, Hive worlds, jungle, desert, ice and snow and all that, fortress worlds and the like. And we also have a nice example of a craft world here. So if you wanted to kind of base your Kraken a bit more uniquely, you could do it with a craft world theme base in the color scheme and look of craft world Eandon, or Eandon, however you want to pronounce that craft world. So those are some basing ideas, and it's not just how you build a base, it's what the Tridos of Warrior add to it. Some extra bits you're going to have left over from your kits to represent the dead Tyranid bodies that the Swarm doesn't care about, because the Hive fleet is just driven in one singular purpose, so it will just climb over its own dead to get to the enemy. Plus any type of bits you can scrounge up or get a hold of to represent the Craft World Eldar or the Imperial forces, or Tau even, can work in your favor to kind of spice up your base a little bit. So there isn't too much to say about Kraken. They're in some novels, just like Behemoth and Leviathan are. In my opinion, I think Kraken is a little bit more subdued in terms of people looking at it a bunch. Its color scheme is a bit more muted, though I think it works very well together. When you compare it to Behemoth and Leviathan, it's relatively tame in terms of a color scheme. And while all three have novelization and codex mentioning, Behemoth is big because of its relevance as the first Tyranid Hive fleet officially encountered in the First Tyrannic War and everything. And Leviathan's pretty big with the Dawn of War support it got in Dawn of War 2. So with Kraken, it doesn't have anything to make it stand up on some type of unique pedestal, but it's still a very cool Hive fleet that does have support. Now, its color scheme is a red. You can go deep with some bright red highlighting on the carapace hard armor sections of the Tyranids, and then for its fleshy bits, I call it kind of like a yellowish sandy brown type of color. I don't know what really to call it, but more of an earthy tone flesh, but kind of a sandy way of doing it. It's like white with a wash of Agrax Earthshade over it, or some other type of brown wash, which is essentially a way you can do that color. So that's its color scheme. Pretty basic and standard when you compare it to things like Behemoth's blue and red and Leviathan's color scheme as well. So it's still a very nice one. It works very well. It complements each other very well, and it's set up well for doing your own splinter fleet from Hive Fleet Kraken, because when it was destroyed, it splintered off as well. So what you can do here is go ahead and build your own Hive fleet using Hive Fleet Kraken as its source, and you can change one color as drastic or as subtle as you want, or change the other color as drastic or as subtle as you want, or do a minor variation of the both. But if you just change one color drastically, the other color is going to work well with it. So the red in that beige sandy color that is its flesh tone, and the red of its carapace, if you change the flesh tone to black or a crimson or magenta, it still is going to work. If you change the red to a black or a yellow or a blue, it's still going to work with that flesh tone. So those two colors will play very nicely with a lot of the color palette out there if you want to do your own Hive fleet. So that's pretty cool. And also with this color scheme, dipping is going to be very effective. Now, of course, you can do the washes and the layers to paint up your Carnifex and your Hive Tyrants and all that, but dipping works very well with this color scheme. You set up the red, you set up the flesh tone, you dip it in the brown dipping wash stain solution thing you can get from Army Painter or elsewhere, and what you have is a very quick and effective way to get a really good look in your Tyranid force for Hive Fleet Kraken. So this is one of those forces that is just naturally suited to a speed painting tactic and still get a nice effect out of it. All you gotta do at that point, if you wanted to, is pick out the teeth to make them stand out from the flesh tones, and then you're basically good to go. The eyes, if you want to do that extra detail. So you pick out those two things, and you can get squads of Hormigons and Termagants and even Gene Stealers and the like done in pretty quick succession. You're going to need the Tyranid Codex, and you're going to need to obviously use Tyranid models from Forge World or GW. If you like Gene Stealers, this might be a Hive Fleet for you if you're open-ended to whatever color scheme, right? Because Kraken, well, every Hive Fleet utilizes Gene Stealers, right? But it's a particular mention in Kraken's fluff that they had a big Gene Stealer infestation going on. So you can do that. You can even convert up some models, so like Tyranid human hybrids, to fit in with your Gene Stealer squads, just to help it stand out. But you have that going on as well. So that is something you can do and make use of if you want to, and if you're able to get a hold of the Space Hulk Gene Stealer models, you can paint them up as Kraken. It'll look good and it'll be appropriate, considering that they had a heavy Gene Stealer presence. So there you go. That's something, if you wanted to focus on, would be very much in fluff with the Hive Fleet. And that aside, that is really it for Hive Fleet Kraken. I mean, there's not much I can say without going into like the more intricate fluff bit stuff about how the Gene Stealers infested planets and led to rebellions and whatnot to further destabilize planetary populations for harvesting by the Gene Stealers, Hive Fleet Kraken overseers, you could say. So Hive Fleet Kraken was a very different way in which the Tyranid hive mind attacked the Imperium and the galaxy at large. And it came some 250 years after the first Tyrannic War with Hive Fleet Behemoth. So Hive Fleet Behemoth, if you look at it, was probably the big Vanguard scout force. Hive Fleet Kraken was a secondary Vanguard scout force. And Leviathan seems to be a bigger main body force, potentially, how it's built up in the fluff, but you can still say it's figuring things out. And you could also say that that's when we get to see maybe more of the Tyranid monstrosity proper, in a sense. But anyway, Hive Fleet Kraken's pretty cool. It lends itself well to, like I said, speed painting, as well as developing your own splinter fleets from it if you wanted to. And all in all, I think a pretty solid fleet in terms of fluff stuff to help you decide what you want to do for basing. And that's where it really comes to life for Tyranids. Color schemes aside, which you can be very varied and cool, when it comes down to basing your models, you can really set up a narrative and a story. And Kraken has a pretty nice addition of a craft world that it tried to attack in terms of Yandin, so you can really go ahead and have some pretty cool looking bases themed very nicely for Kraken to help you force stand out even further. Anyways, that's it for Hive Fleet Kraken. Thanks for taking a look. If you have any questions or comments, leave it in the comment section, and who knows, maybe this is a Tyranid force for you if you're considering Tyranids. Anyways, that's it. So until next time, take it easy.